She crashed a 42-foot yacht into his fishing boat and told him to move. A Beneteau Gran Turismo, white hull trimmed in navy, came off plane at the wrong angle inside the no-wake zone of Harlan Cove Marina and carved its starboard bow across the transom of a 26-foot Carolina skiff tied to slip 14 since before dawn. The skiff lurched sideways, its port cleat ripped clean from the gunwale, the hull cracked along a seam that had held for 11 years. Bait buckets went over. A tackle box burst open on impact and sent hooks and swivels scattering across the dock planking like coins from a broken jar. The woman at the helm killed the engines too late. She was already standing by the time the wake settled, oversized sunglasses pushed into blonde hair that cost more to maintain than the skiff was worth. She looked at the damage, the way someone looks at a shopping cart that has bumped their car in a parking lot. Annoyed. Not sorry. The man on the dock was already kneeling, not to inspect the damage, to pick up a photograph that had fallen from the console compartment when the dash split open. A photograph in a waterproof sleeve, creased at one corner, of a woman holding a baby on this same dock, the same slip number visible on the piling behind her. He slid the photograph into his shirt pocket and stood. The woman on the Beneteau looked at him, looked at the skiff, looked at his work boots, his faded shirt, the fish blood drying on his forearm. "You need to move that thing," she said. "You are blocking the fairway." He did not answer. He picked up the tackle box. He closed it carefully. He set it on what remained of the console. Behind her, at the harbor master's office, a door opened. A man in a Port Authority polo stepped out carrying a clipboard and a file folder with a red tab. He walked down the dock without hurrying. He stopped next to the skiff, glanced at the Beneteau's hull number, and opened the folder. He looked at the woman on the yacht, then he looked at the man holding the tackle box, and he said, "Mr. Osei, you want me to call it in now or after she sees the paperwork?" The man with the tackle box shook his head once. "Let her dock first," he said. The woman on the Beneteau had not moved. She did not yet know that the man she had just told to move was the man whose name was on the deed to the harbor she was standing in. "Now, before I tell you what was in that folder, I need you to do something for me. Drop your city in the comments right now. Tell me where you are watching from, because this story is about a place that people fight over without understanding who built it, and I want to know if your town has a version of this. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe. Ring the bell. You are going to want to see how this ends, and you are going to want to see the ones coming after it." His name was Kwame Osei. He was 44 years old. He had lived in Harlan Cove, North Carolina, for 6 years, and before that, he had lived in places that did not appear on any lease or utility bill because the work he did required that he not appear at all. He was a civil engineer. That was the version he gave at the school when Addie's teachers asked what her father did. The longer version involved 17 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. 4 of those spent overseas on infrastructure assessment in post-conflict zones, and the rest spent on domestic harbor and levee projects for the Southeastern Division out of Wilmington. He had a master's degree from Howard. He had published 3 peer-reviewed papers on tidal erosion modeling that were cited in federal flood risk policy documents he would never be invited to present because the people who presented those documents did not look like him and did not know his name. He did not talk about any of this. What he talked about, when he talked at all, was the boat, the skiff. He had bought it from a retired shrimper named Gus Halliday 11 years ago for $2,200 and a promise to keep it in the water. It was not pretty. The gel coat had gone chalky years ago. The motor was a 2011 Yamaha 4-stroke that started on the 3rd pull if the weather was warm and the 5th if it was not. But it ran clean, and it sat in the water the way a good boat should, and when Kwame took it out past the jetty at 4:30 in the morning, the way the bow cut the harbor chop was the closest thing he had to church. His wife, Nessa, had loved that boat. Not the fishing. She had loved the morning, the stillness of the harbor before anyone else was awake, the osprey nest on the channel marker, the way the light came off the water and turned everything the color of weak tea. She had taken the photograph that now lived in the console compartment on their second anniversary. Addie had been 5 months old, and Nessa had held her up on the dock and said something Kwame could no longer remember, and he had laughed, and she had taken the picture with one hand while holding the baby with the other. The composition was terrible. The light was perfect. It was the last summer before everything changed. Nessa died in March, 4 years ago. Pulmonary embolism. She was 36. She had been standing in the kitchen of their rental house on Bayberry Lane, making Addie's lunch for the next day, cutting the crusts off a peanut butter sandwich because Addie had decided that week that crusts were a personal offense. Kwame had been at his desk in the next room. He heard something fall. Not a crash, a settling, the sound of a person and a cutting board and a plate all arriving at the floor at the same time. He did not talk about that either. What he did, after, was what he had always done. He got up early. He made Addie's lunch. He cut the crusts off because she still did not want them, and he did not have the fight left in him to argue about bread. He drove her to Harlan Cove Elementary in a 2015 Nissan Frontier with 211,000 miles on it and rust blooming along the rear wheel wells. He kissed her on the forehead. He told her to be good. She told him to be good back, which was something Nessa used to say, and neither of them acknowledged that it was Nessa's phrase, because acknowledging it would have made it fragile. Then he drove to the marina, and he worked. His work at the marina was not the engineering. The engineering happened on a laptop at the kitchen table after Addie was asleep, on calls with the Wilmington district office, on site visits he scheduled around school pickup. The marina work was simpler. He maintained the docks. He replaced cleats and pilings. He checked the fuel dock pump calibration. He kept the channel markers painted and visible. He did this not because he was the maintenance man, but because when he had first arrived in Harlan Cove, the marina had been 90 days from losing its Army Corps permit due to a failed bulkhead inspection, and he had fixed the bulkhead himself over 2 weekends with lumber he paid for out of his own pocket, because the town did not have the budget and the state did not have the interest, and the marina was the only public boat launch within 40 miles. Nobody had asked him to do this. He had simply seen that it needed doing. The harbor master, a man named Dewey Craddock, had watched him do it. Dewey was 61, a retired Coast Guard boatswain's mate who had run the marina for 9 years, and who understood, in the way that only a man who has spent his entire life on the water can understand, that Kwame Osei was not a handyman with a toolbox. He was something else entirely. Dewey did not ask what. He simply handed Kwame the spare key to the fuel shed and told him to lock up when he was done. That was how it started. Every morning, Kwame checked the dock lines. Every evening, he walked the seawall. On Saturdays, when Addie had her art class at the community center, he sat in the harbor master's office with Dewey, and they drank coffee from a thermos Kwame brought from home, and they talked about the harbor the way two men talk about a thing they love without ever once using the word love. Addie was 7 now. She had her mother's hands. Long fingers, narrow palms, the kind of hands that looked like they were built for piano or surgery, but in Addie's case, were used primarily for drawing detailed portraits of fish she had never caught. She kept a sketchbook in the truck, and when Kwame worked at the marina, she sat on the dock with her feet hanging over the water and drew whatever caught her eye: mullet, blue crabs, the pelican that roosted on the fuel dock piling every afternoon at 3:15 with the regularity of a government employee. She called the pelican Dr. Beak. She asked about her mother in the truck, usually. Never at home. Something about the motion of the vehicle, the way neither of them had to look at the other, made the questions possible. "Did Mom like the pelican?" she asked once. "Your mom never met that particular pelican," Kwame said, "but she would have liked him." "How do you know he is a him?" "I don't. But your mother would have liked him either way." Addie thought about this for a quarter mile. "I think Dr. Beak is a her," she said, "because she shows up every day and does her job and doesn't make a big deal about it." Kwame did not say anything. He adjusted the rearview mirror, which did not need adjusting. That was Addie. She arrived at the truth by a side door and never knocked first. The woman who crashed the Beneteau into Kwame's skiff was named Caroline Averill. She was 37, the daughter of Trent Averill, who had made his fortune in commercial real estate development along the Outer Banks and had, 12 years ago, purchased a 7,000-square-foot house on the bluff above Harlan Cove Marina with a private dock extension that he used 4 weekends a year. Caroline used it more often. She had moved into the house full-time 18 months ago after a divorce that had left her with the boat, a Range Rover, and an anger she could not yet name because naming it would have required admitting that the life she had built with her ex-husband had been, from the very beginning, her father's money dressed in her husband's ambitions. She was not stupid. She was not cruel by nature. She was a woman who had spent her entire life in rooms where her presence was never questioned, and that absence of questioning had calcified into a belief that her judgment about who belonged where was simply accurate. She did not think of it as prejudice. She thought of it as observation. She had observed that the man on slip 14 drove a truck with rust on it. She had observed that he arrived before dawn and stayed past dark. She had observed that he moved through the marina as though he owned it, which she found presumptuous, because her father's property tax assessment on the Bluff house alone exceeded every other residential parcel on Cove Road combined. She had observed these things and drawn conclusions, and the conclusions felt like facts. It had started 13 months ago, the first time she saw Kwame replacing a dockboard near the fuel pump. She had walked over and asked if the harbor master had authorized the work. Kwame had said yes. She had asked if he had a contractor's license. Kwame had said he was not a contractor. She had asked then, "What exactly are you?" And Kwame had looked at her with the expression of a man who has been asked that question in various forms for most of his adult life and has long since stopped answering it. He had gone back to the dockboard. She had called the county code enforcement office the next day. She called them again the following week. She called the property manager who handled her father's Bluff house to ask whether the marina's liability coverage extended to unauthorized labor. She emailed the town council. She took photographs of Kwame's truck in the marina parking lot and sent them to the harbor master's office with a subject line that read, "Unregistered vehicles on public marine access property." She watered her father's hydrangeas every evening at 6:30. She read novels on the porch overlooking the harbor. She made elaborate salads that she ate alone at a table that seated 12. She was not a monster. She was a woman who had lost the architecture of her life and was rebuilding it out of the only materials she had left, which were money and authority and the assumption that both entitled her to determine who belonged in her sightline. And the whole time, she had no idea who she was targeting. Kwame did not respond to any of it, not because he could not because he did not notice. He noticed everything. He noticed when the code enforcement officer arrived and walked the docks with a clipboard and left without issuing a citation because there was nothing to cite. He noticed when the property manager called Dewey to ask about the truck. He noticed when Caroline stood on the dock near his skiff one evening while he was cleaning his catch and looked at him with an expression that was not hatred, but something more corrosive, a refusal to see him as a person who might have reasons she had not considered. He did not explain himself because he was not finished. What Caroline Averill did not know, what no one in Harlan Cove outside of Dewey Craddock and a supervising engineer named Dr. Rose Achebe at the Wilmington District Office knew, was that Kwame Osei had been conducting a 2-year tidal infrastructure assessment of Harlan Cove Marina under a federal resilience grant designated FEMA Dr. 4412NC. The grant had been issued after Hurricane Florence. The scope was comprehensive: seawall integrity analysis, sediment transport modeling, dock load certification, channel depth survey, fuel storage compliance, and a full environmental impact study for the proposed expansion of the public boat launch. The work required daily on-site observation over multiple tidal cycles across all 4 seasons. It required someone with the credentials to conduct the analysis and the patience to do it. without turning the marina into a construction zone that would shut down commercial fishing access for 18 months. Kwame was the only engineer in the district who had volunteered for embedded fieldwork. Dr. Achebe had tried to talk him out of it. She had called him at 9 on a Tuesday night, 2 years ago, while he was packing Addie's lunch. "You know this means living on site," she had said. "No office, no team, just you and a laptop and a lot of early mornings." "I already live here," he said, "and I already do the early mornings. The county doesn't know about the grant yet. The town council hasn't been briefed. You are going to be working in a place where nobody understands what you are doing, and some of them are going to make assumptions about why you are there." "I know what assumptions look like, Rose." She had paused. She had known him for 11 years. She had recruited him out of his second deployment. "Just don't punch anyone," she said. "I don't punch people." "I know. That's what worries me. You just stand there and take it, and then you write a report so thorough that the person who gave you trouble ends up depending on your work for the next 20 years. She was not wrong. The assessment was now in its final quarter. Kwame had completed the seawall analysis, the sediment modeling, and the channel survey. The dock load certification was finished. The fuel storage compliance review had resulted in 3 upgrades that the marina had implemented without knowing that a federal engineer had authored the recommendations. The environmental impact study was in draft, and the expansion plan, which would add 12 new slips, a kayak launch, an ADA-accessible fishing pier, and a redesigned breakwater that would protect the marina from storm surge up to a Category 3 event, was sitting in a folder on Kwame's laptop, 214 pages long, awaiting final submission to the State Coastal Management Office and the Army Corps Southeastern Division. The folder was labeled HC 2024 OSE. His name was on every page, and the woman on the yacht had spent 13 months trying to get rid of him. The morning Caroline Averill's Beneteau hit his skiff, Kwame had been at the marina since 4:15. He had been taking final depth readings at the channel mouth for the sediment report. He had finished at 5:40, tied the skiff to slip 14, and was logging the data on his phone when he heard the Beneteau's engines and looked up just in time to see the hull bearing down on his port side at a speed roughly 3 times the posted limit for the inner harbor. The impact was not catastrophic. It was worse than that. It was careless. When Dewey Craddock walked down the dock with the red-tabbed folder, he was not carrying the folder because of the collision. He was carrying it because this was the morning the Army Corps Southeastern Division had formally accepted the Harlan Cove Marina Resilience and Expansion Plan. The acceptance letter had arrived by email at 7 that morning. Dewey had printed it and placed it in the folder alongside the project summary, the grant authorization, and the deed transfer paperwork that had been finalized 3 weeks earlier by the State Coastal Management Office. The deed transfer. Because the expansion plan included the construction of a new public breakwater on a parcel of submerged land adjacent to the marina, and because the federal resilience grant required a named project lead with signatory authority over the construction phase, and because Kwame Osei was the author, the engineer, and the only person qualified to oversee the work, the state of North Carolina had, through its Coastal Management Office, placed a conservation and infrastructure easement on the harbor parcel in his name. Kwame Osei's name was on the deed to Harlan Cove Harbor, not as owner, as custodian, as the engineer of record whose professional authority governed what could be built, what could be modified, and what could be operated within the harbor's federal jurisdiction for the duration of the 20-year resilience plan. Caroline Averill's slip, her father's dock extension, her Beneteau's berth, all of it fell within that jurisdiction. The billionaire's daughter had just crashed her yacht into the fishing boat of the man who held authority over the entire harbor. Dewey opened the folder on the dock. He held it so that Caroline could see the letterhead. Army Corps of Engineers, Federal Emergency Management Agency, State of North Carolina Coastal Management, and at the bottom, in the signature block of every document, the name Kwame Osei, P.E., followed by his license number and his district designation. Caroline looked at the documents. She looked at Kwame, who was still holding his tackle box, who had fish blood drying on his forearm, who had not raised his voice once in 13 months of her phone calls and complaints and code enforcement summons. Dewey said, "The entire harbor improvement plan was authored by Mr. Osei. He has been the project engineer on site for 2 years. Every dock you have walked on, every piling, every seawall section, he either assessed it, repaired it, or redesigned it. And as of this morning, the federal government has accepted his plan. His name is on the harbor deed as engineer of record, which means if you want to keep your slip, your dock, or your boat in this marina, you will be dealing with him." Kwame set the tackle box down on the dock. "You should get your insurance information together," he said. "For the skiff." That was all he said. Caroline stood on the Beneto's swim platform with both hands on the transom rail. Her fingers were white at the knuckles. Her mouth opened and closed once, a motion she was not aware of making. She looked at the cracked hull of the skiff, at the cleat torn from the gunwale, at the console where the photograph had been, and for the first time in 13 months, she saw the boat not as an obstruction, but as a thing that belonged to someone. She went below without speaking. Dewey looked at Kwame. "You could have told her 6 months ago. The assessment wasn't done. The assessment was done in January." Kwame picked up a bait bucket that had rolled against a dock post. "The assessment was done when I said it was done," he said. Dewey shook his head and walked back to the office. He was smiling, but he waited until his back was turned. Caroline drove home on Cove Road at 31 miles an hour. The speed limit was 35. She had never driven below it in 18 months of living here. She parked in the driveway and did not get out. She sat with the engine off and the windows up, and she thought about the emails. 14 of them, to the county, to the town council, to the property manager. She thought about the photographs she had taken of his truck. She thought about the morning she had walked to the fuel dock and asked Kwame what exactly he was. She thought about the way he had looked at her. Not with anger, not with patience exactly. With the expression of a person who has already finished a calculation that you have not yet begun. She thought about her father's hydrangeas and her elaborate salads and her table for 12 and the divorce and the money and the way she had spent a year deciding that a man with rust on his truck did not belong in a place that had been, the entire time, a place he was rebuilding from the inside out. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She sat in the car for 40 minutes, and then she went inside and watered the hydrangeas at 6:30 because the hydrangeas did not care who she was, and the routine was the only structure she had left. That evening, Kwame picked Addie up from her art class. She climbed into the truck with her sketchbook under her arm and a smudge of green paint on her chin. "Someone hit the boat," she said. She had heard it at the community center. Word traveled in small towns the way weather traveled along the coast, arriving before anyone had time to prepare for it. "Yes," Kwame said. "Is it broken?" "The hull cracked. I am going to fix it. Can I help?" "You can hand me things." Addie opened her sketchbook and showed him the drawing she had made that morning before art class. It was Dr. Beek, in profile, standing on the fuel dock piling. She had drawn every feather on the Pelican's neck with the kind of obsessive precision that Kwame recognized because Nessa had done the same thing with her architectural sketches, hunched over the kitchen table, erasing and redrawing the same line until it submitted. "That's good," he said. "I know," Addie said. She was not being arrogant, she was being 7. "Did Mom draw birds?" "Your mom drew buildings," Kwame said, "but she drew them the way you draw birds, like she was trying to get something right that nobody else could see was wrong." Addie thought about this. "Do you think Dr. Beek knows she is beautiful?" she asked. "I think Dr. Beek knows she shows up every day and does her job. Whether she is beautiful is something other people get to decide." "That's a weird answer, Dad." "I know." He pulled into the driveway. He turned off the engine. That night, after Addie was asleep, Kwame opened his laptop at the kitchen table and found an email from Dr. Achebe. The subject line read, "Congratulations, Mr. Custodian." The body of the email was 2 sentences. "The Corps has accepted the plan. You should be proud of yourself, but I know you won't be, so I am being proud for both of us." He closed the laptop. He opened the kitchen drawer next to the stove and placed the printed acceptance letter inside, next to a stack of Addie's report cards and the waterproof sleeve that held Nessa's photograph from the dock, the one he had put back in the console that afternoon after patching the crack with marine epoxy that would hold until he could do the job properly on Saturday. He closed the drawer. On Thursday of the following week, Caroline Averill appeared at Slip 14 at 6:45 in the morning, carrying a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. Kwame was sanding the patch on the skiff's hull. He saw her coming down the dock. He kept sanding. She stopped 3 feet from the skiff. She held the dish in front of her the way a person holds something they are not sure will be accepted. "I made too much," she said. He looked at the dish. He looked at her. She was not wearing the sunglasses. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from the particular sleeplessness of a person who has recently understood something about themselves that they cannot return to the store. "Thank you," he said. He took the dish and set it on the dock. He did not say it was fine. He did not say he understood. He went back to sanding. Caroline stood there for a moment, her hands empty now, and she looked at the skiff as though she were seeing it for the first time. She looked at the patched hull. She looked at the console, where the photograph was back in its waterproof sleeve. "I am sorry about your boat," she said. "It will hold," he said. She nodded. She turned to go. Addie was sitting on the dock 4 slips down, her sketchbook open, her feet over the water. She had been watching the whole exchange with the direct, unblinking attention that children bring to adult interactions they do not fully understand, but recognize as important. Caroline walked past her. Addie looked up. "That's my dad's boat you hit," Addie said. Not accusatory, not forgiving, just factual. The way you might tell someone that the sky was blue or that Dr. Beak was a girl. Caroline stopped. "I know," she said. "He's going to fix it," Addie said. "He fixes everything here." Caroline looked at the child. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she walked up the dock toward the parking lot, her sandals clicking on the planking, and she did not look back, because looking back would have required a kind of composure she did not yet have. The following Saturday, Kwame got up at 4. He made coffee in the same thermos he always used, the dented steel one with the faded Howard University sticker on the side. He packed Addie's lunch, cutting the crusts off the bread the way he had done every school morning for 4 years. It was Saturday, so the lunch was for the cooler. She would eat it on the dock while he worked on the hull. He drove to the marina. The harbor was still dark. The channel markers blinked their patterns. The osprey nest on the number 4 marker was empty, the chicks having fledged in August. He pulled the skiff out of the water on the trailer and set it on blocks in the yard behind the harbor master's office. He laid out his tools: fiberglass cloth, resin, hardener, a mixing cup he had washed and reused so many times the measurement lines were almost gone. Addie sat on an overturned bucket with her sketchbook and drew the hull while he worked. She drew the crack and the patch in her father's hands, and she got the hands right because she had her mother's eye for the thing that mattered most in the frame. At 7:15, Dewey arrived with 2 coffees from the gas station on Route 12. "You know you could have filed a damage claim and had the whole hull replaced," Dewey said. "I like this hull," Kwame said. "It's got a crack in it. Everything worth keeping has a crack in it." Dewey sat on the tailgate of Kwame's truck and drank his coffee and watched Kwame work and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else to say. At noon, Kwame cleaned his tools. He loaded the skiff back onto the trailer. He drove it down to the ramp and backed it into the water and let it float off the bunks and tied it to Slip 14, where it sat in the water the way it always had, low and steady, the patch barely visible unless you knew where to look. He stood on the dock and looked at the harbor. The breakwater he had designed was going to be built on the far side of the channel, a curved structure of armor stone and concrete that would change the way the water moved through this place for the next 50 years. His name would be on the engineering drawings. His name was already on the deed. But the harbor would not look different to the people who used it. It would simply hold. Addie came and stood next to him. She put her hand on the dock railing, which was a piling he had replaced 7 months ago, and she looked at the water. "Can we go out tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes. Early. Always early." She went back to her bucket and her sketchbook. Kwame filled the thermos for the morning. He rinsed the mixing cup and hung it on the peg inside the fuel shed. He locked the shed with the key Dewey had given him 2 years ago, the key that had started everything, or at least everything that was visible. He drove home with the windows down. Addie fell asleep in the passenger seat before they reached Bayberry Lane, her sketchbook open on her lap to the drawing of his hands, the pencil still between her fingers, the way Nessa used to fall asleep with a pen in her hand at the kitchen table, mid-sentence, mid-line, mid-thought, as though the work would wait for her and she trusted it to. Kwame pulled into the driveway. He turned off the engine. He sat for a moment in the quiet truck, his daughter asleep beside him, the thermos on the center console, the harbor behind them, the morning ahead. He reached over and closed the sketchbook gently, so the drawing would not smudge. Then he carried her inside.